Hello, everyone. Back again with one of the most exciting games of round two of the United States Chess Championship that is being held in St. Louis. Today, we look at the game between Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces and Grandmaster Sam Shankland with the black pieces. Let's get started. E4, E6, which is the French defense, D4, D5, Knight C3. Of course, there are uh, several different options here. Knight D2 is the Tarrasch variation. E5, the advanced variation. But in the game, the classical and most popular Knight C3 was played. And the simple idea here, just for the very beginning player, is white wants to maintain this pawn duel in the center just as it is as long as possible. And in lieu of that, he would love to induce black just to simply give up his representation in the center by exchanging, thus giving white a pawn preponderance in the center, as now this lone pawn in the center on d4 controls and influences squares e5 and c5. And as we see, this is what is meant by giving up the center, as now black has no d pawn, right? The d pawn is gone. Let's go back to where the d pawn is there. With this pawn gone, black loses his influence over the squares c4 and e4. So, of course, black normally does not want to give up his center. Instead, he tries to hold on to this strong point on d5. So the game continued with bishop b4. This is one of the epic lines in the French defense, and it's known as the Winawer variation, or Winawer, if you want to pronounce it in the German or Dutch way. In this line, usually features the battle between the bishops versus the knights, as black usually parts with his dark squared bishop. Again, for the absolute novice player, what this move does, by pinning the knight to c3, because the king is behind it and this knight cannot move, this pawn on e4 is no longer defended. So black is actually threatening to take due to this pin. So let's get rid of some of the graphics. So after bishop b4, white has an important choice to make: what to do with the e4 pawn. White can capture, that's one option. He can push to e5, that's an option. Or he can try something like bishop d3 to try to maintain the pawn there. But this pawn is now unprotected. There's worse moves like f3 to try to maintain. So after years of practice, e5 is considered the main move for good reason. So now the pawn structure in the center has been clarified, and we're going to have a closed game for the most part. And the strategy gets pretty complicated here, and we will try to highlight some of the motifs for both sides. Now, with this pawn advance, first I want to say is that white does waste time because black has developed a piece and then white moved his pawn to e5. So he did lose a tempo, and that's in black's favor. But what does white gain out of this maneuver e5? Well, he takes the most natural square for the knight away. So this knight will not appear on f6. So that's one benefit of the move. Secondly, with e5, white gains space on the king side. All in this section, he gains a lot of space on the king side, and that's usually where he will attempt to make his game, is attacking the black king over there. Now, for black has a clear target on d4, and he will try to prove that these two pawns are weak and over advanced. These are fixed targets now. So moves like c5 are played in the French almost 100% of the time, and if they're not played, usually black goes down pretty quickly because c5 is a necessary move, and this falls in with Nimzovich's principle of attacking a pawn at the base. In this case, the base will be at d4, but sometimes the pawn is attacked at the head also. And we can see that it would be more favorable to attack the pawn at the base because moving the f pawn will weaken the king side somewhat, as it's diagonal going from h5 to e8 would be open after the move f6, for instance. And then many times the e6 pawn becomes weak also as a result. So it is kind of a double-edged move, but you do see it in some French defense lines. So c5 is definitely more preferable as far as counterattack against the white center. Another thing that is interesting is that as far as pawn breaks are concerned, white would ideally love to play f4, f5, but as we can see, it's very hard to get this advance in realistically. This bishop is here naturally, just enforcing the pawn on e6, and oftentimes g6 will get played, and it's very hard for white to realize his break in that manner. Meanwhile, on the other hand, black's break comes easily. It's one move, he's already prepared to counterattack with c5, and with that move, this also indicates that by the direction of these pawns is that black's main counterplay will come on the queen side. Another thing I would like to say about the pawn advance e5 here for white, and this advantage that I forgot to mention, is that this move e5 fixes these pawns on light squares, which makes it very difficult for the c8 bishop to get involved in the game. And we see that in also lines of the queen's gambit, his bishop being nicknamed the problem bishop. So that was a little bit of background for beginners. So let's get on with the game. So after e5 was played, knight e7, right? Remember I told you that this square was taken away, so the knight has to develop sometime. So knight e7, this knight usually comes here or here, depending on black's strategy. If it goes to f5, black puts pressure here. This pawn will be on c5. This knight will come here to c6, all with the idea of putting pressure on the pawn, and a lot of times this queen will end up on b6, putting pressure here. I know that's a lot of arrows, get carried away with it sometimes. If the knight goes to g6, then pressure is being put on e5, and usually ideas like f6, the queen will be on c7 and attacking this pawn. Of course, this pawn will be up here on c5, this knight will be on c6 and attacking the structure in that manner. In other words, black must vigorously attack these two pawns in the squares. The reason why is if white is able to maintain them comfortably, it's a big advantage, especially going into the end game. So black's whole game is to attack vigorously and counteract that. Okay, so moving on, Shankland played knight e7. a3 was played. Now, even at this point, there's many moves that can be played. Some of you with a keen eye might have noticed this pawn is unprotected. So, for instance, one of the main lines would be like queen g4. Moves like queen g4 gets played sometimes, and this pawn is just left by black, known as the poison pawn variation. So knight e7, a3, and I don't know if the move order is really that important. Usually c5 is played right away before knight e7, but it might not matter. It doesn't seem to matter. So notice too, and it seems anti-positional because black parts with this dark squared bishop, leaving himself with the bad bishop. So he gives up his good bishop and leaves himself with the bad bishop. What does he have in exchange? Because anytime you give up some type of advantage, the bishop here is an advantage, is a good thing to have. So you have to ask yourself, well, what does black have in return for that? Well, he's destroyed white's pawn structure on the queen side. He's weakened it as to make his play in this sector of the board a little more easier. These pawns being weakened are easier to attack, and that's his trade-off for giving up that bishop. So it's not just like he's just giving up the bishop for nothing. Okay, now c5 as we talked about, and we see the lines open up on the dark squares over here. Attack here, the queen will go to a5, b6, or c7, all designed to attack this complex of squares. Okay, there's queen g4 as I mentioned earlier. Like I said, I'm not sure if the move order is sufficient. Attacking this pawn. Shankland castles. Now, I want to point out an important variation here, which is very viable for black, and it's called the poisoned pawn variation. So, for instance, after queen g4, instead of castling, a move like queen c7 can be played. Queen takes g7, rook g8, queen takes h7, c takes d4, and just a quick example, let's say knight e2. The reason why knight e2, this is threatened right here. Queen takes check. So either king d1 is played or knight e2 to stave off those threats. So we'll go with the old. Uh, so after c takes d4, knight e2. So we see that basically, to use the old cliche, all hell is broken loose on the board. So black has given up, sacrificed some material, but he has a nice rook, uh, just bearing down on the G file. White's center and queen side is in complete shambles. So at the knight e2, knight b c6, that's putting more pressure, developing. f4, bishop d7, queen d3, d takes. Now queen takes c3 can be played. There's all kind of moves here. Queen takes c3, knight c3 can be played. Even rook b1 or knight g3 have been tried. And this is a hellacious position that would definitely benefit the more prepared player. This is one of those lines that you have to study your tail off to keep yourself from losing very quickly. But there he has this. Is pretty even. Maybe a slight advantage to white. Of course, black is gonna try to castle queenside, or is gonna castle queenside, and attack down these files with his pieces. Basically, he's gonna try to mate. He's gonna try to mate white. Continue to chip away at the center, and white is gonna try to consolidate using his bishop here and try to keep his king protected. Let's get rid of some of these things. Keep his king protected and eventually realize his extra pawn. Notice white has a passed pawn right on the outside. So if he's able to hold up under black's attack, then eventually he'll realize this extra material. So that, my friends, is the poisoned pawn variation. And it's definitely very exciting and very sharp. And it's been played by the greatest, none other than Victor Korchnoi. If you play the French defense as black, you have to be familiar with his games. Okay, let's get back to the main line. So Sam Shankland did not play the poison pawn. He didn't want to give up this pawn. So after castle, which is also a popular move, bishop d3 is played, and now the position looks kind of dangerous for black. You had this bishop here, you had the queen here, and you have the early makings of a kingside attack. So black has to be careful. Knight bc6, queen h5, just a primitive threat of checkmate in one. Knight g6. Now Shankland makes this move, and he protects against the threat without weakening his king side. And there's some pressure here now. We see that black can win a pawn here. There's pressure here. So black is defending, but he's also just putting in his counterplay against the center at the same time. So he's being pretty efficient. But he has to be very careful, because in a position like this, one slip up and it can be over. To show you how sharp this position is, let me just give you a sample. Like, for instance, say a move like h6, right? Say bishop takes h6, right? G takes, queen takes, and say knight f5, right? You're attacking the queen, you block the bishop, and now you're about to realize your fantastic advantage, right? Okay, so bishop takes, e takes, castle. Now this rook wants to come here and over. F4. Idea is to bring the bishop. So knight h3. Let's say knight e7. Knight g5, threatening mate. Bishop f5. G4. Bishop e4. Rook h e1. Queen b6. Right, he wants to trade queens off. e6. Not having it. Bishop g6. It looks like he's warding off the attack. Rook d3. And this rook is going here. And it's all over. That game was from Lugano, 1989, between player with the white pieces named Mouse and the black pieces Hubner. And this bishop, if he captures, well, just simply c takes d3, and then there's no defense here. So that just shows you that things can go wrong very quickly. So Shankland played knight g6, knight h3, queen c7. Again, keeping an eye on this king, but setting up the counterplay. Bishop e3, putting pressure here, but I don't think that white really wants to take here, because then this pawn would just fall. I thought this was a critical move here, and Caruana, after the game, stated that he was pleased after Shankland had played this move, c4. It's a double-edged move. The reason is that, yes, black wants to have his counterplay on the queen side. But c4 is very committal, because once you push the pawn, you can't get it back. And yes, he forces forces white to part with this powerful light square bishop. But the thing is by closing down the center like this, then he pretty much loses any play against these pawns. Because with the pawn on c5, there's always pressure against these pawns, and white has to be mindful of that. Once he plays this move, then white does not have to worry about this. The only way this center can be torn down now is by this move, f6. And now we see that black has his pieces set up for that. But at the same time, white is building up a kingside attack, and the move f6 weakens the kingside. So you kind of have a clash of ideas there. So in the clash of philosophies there. So the weaken is kingside, which white would be happy about to play against this pawn on e5. So c4 was definitely a double-edged move there, because you kind of stop your own counterplay in a way by doing that. But anyway, after c4, Caruana exchanged. F takes g6 was played. So now what's interesting also with that capture right, with this capture f takes g6, is notice there's no pressure on these pawns anymore. So white does not have to worry about anything going on in the center. So he can just pursue his kingside attack without worrying. So now, strategically, what black has to do, he bring his bishop to d7, play a6, b5. I'm sorry, a5, b5, b4, and to attack these pawns on a3 and b and c3. That's a long distance plan. So what black has to do here is basically protect this king from getting squashed, getting attacked, and then hopefully he can organize his counterplay on the king side. So it's going to be a tough task against the 2800 player. Also, he has to resolve the problem of this bishop. Okay, so queen g4 is played. Queen f7. So here we see some pressure down here on the f file, but basically what black is doing is he's trying to protect his king as best as he can before he continues with this counterplay, because he knows that his king is going to come under attack. So he's just trying to fortify the castle, so to speak. Knight f4. So now we have ideas of h4 and h5 coming into the picture here. There's some pressure against this pawn, which is weak, and the action of the queen and rook blunted on the f file. Knight e7, again fortifying the castle. We have ideas now of knight coming into f7, f5, or queen coming down to f5 and trading queens, which black would love to do. There's h4. h6. h6 is an interesting move. Idea just being real simple. If white got all rammy with h5, then just simply shutting down the position with g5 would work. So h6 is not a bad move. The only negative we could say about it is that it does weaken the king side a little bit. A move like queen f5 is possible, but Caruana probably it's interesting. I mean, either a move like queen e2 followed by g4, tapping the queen, is possible, or he might even been able to go into this ending and then play g4. But I think what he would have probably did is play queen e2 followed by g4. So h6. Yes, queen e2, preparing g4. Bishop d7. So basically black has fortified his king side to his satisfaction, and now he's ready to get going with his queen side counterplay, because these pawns are going to stay weak. So black's strategy has been superb so far. He's fortified the king side to the best of his ability so that white isn't overrunning him over there, and now he's ready to launch his plan. There's g4. There's b5. So we see the play on the opposite wings, the center being locked. f3. Interesting move, because this pawn is weak. Now notice this knight can't can't really move. This knight on f4 can't really move because the pawn on f3 is weak. It will be captured by the queen. a5, just continuing on. Just want to show you that move. Would say he just tried to knock the knight away real quick. Be a bad move because again this will fit right into White's plans. Right, opening up the H file. Let's say just make a bad move here. H takes G5, and then it's basically all over after that. Right, he will have to give up the queen pretty much to save to create an exit for the king. So Shankland rightfully continues with the plan that's required in the position. King f2, just getting the king into a good spot and preparing. And now we see the idea with f3 is a spot for the king, and now the rooks are connected on the back rank. This rook is ready to swing over if it has to. And this rook can swing over if it has to. So notice White is not even concerned about the action down the f file. Okay, so after king f2, again let's look at this again, right? Because now two pieces are protecting, so that move would be just as bad. But this time, notice the queen can't swing over here, so the knight is really under assault. But the knight just swings back, and notice now this pawn is protected, and this pawn on g5 is not protected. So some brutality would take place after knight takes g5. So again, that's what's going on with that. Rook a b8, just planning a push. King g3, just getting the king off the this file in case anything is to happen. Meanwhile, this is protected, so White's king is well protected. Bishop d7, bishop d2, here comes the counterplay. A takes b4, rook h b1. Okay, so some of you are saying, hey, why not just c takes b4, right? The bishop is protecting the pawn on b4. Rook cannot capture. There's just some tactics here. In c3, notice the situation here. This bishop on d2 is protecting this knight here, right, along with the king. So after a move c3, we can see that if this is pushed over, right, if it's distracted or deflected, then that would win. So move like bishop e3 would have to be played, and rook takes b4 could occur, or even just piling more pressure with knight c6. So therefore, that's why Caruana opted for a rook h b1. Okay, so knight c6, Shankland is playing very well. Queen e3, b3, again just pushing his counterplay to the limits. Bishop c1. If c takes b3, Then G5 may be an option here. Let's see. I think it's still worse for black, but I like to try that move because it's interesting. See, H takes G5, H takes G5, and Knight G3, and we see a triple attack on this pawn here, right? C takes B3. Looks like this pawn is gonna do something, but it's nothing really to worry about. Just simply take here, and white's attack is gonna prevail here. So let's go back to the game. So after B3, just simply bishop C1 was played. So this move could have been played. So perhaps Caruana playing a little bit too cautious and not wanting to capture that pawn there. Bishop D7. And now we see the purpose of bishop C1. Notice earlier this bishop is we have to classify it as a bad bishop. It's locked behind the pawn chain the whole entire game. So he comes up with this maneuver to get his bishop in a better spot. This is just good insight. So he protects the knight with the king and queen, and now he's going to improve this piece, which is really Caruana's worst piece. And once it gets outside of this pawn chain, it is a killer. The reason why it's so powerful is because black has no counterpart to oppose it. Remember early in the game where black decided to play the Winawer variation and on move 5 played bishop takes c3? Well, now it's coming back to haunt him because he has no counterpart on the dark squares. Meanwhile, black's bishop is still bad. Look at this pawn chain. All of these are white pawns. This is brutal because this bishop only has this diagonal to go back and forth. So that's some strategy for you right there. So now compare these two bishops. This bishop on a3 has a bright future. Can stop at any of these squares if it needs to. Meanwhile, the bishop on d7 is still looking for employment of a meaningful nature. So if we had to compare jobs, right, of the two bishops, we would say this bishop right here on a3 is an astronaut, and we would say this bishop is basically like a hole digger or something like that. You know, just like a real low level job, not knocking any type of job, but just so you get the picture in your mind that, you know, that one is just doing so much more than the other. All right, so bishop d7, bishop a3 was played. Now again, let me just explain this move too, because I know there's a lot of new chess players out there. Okay, so you might say, well, why didn't he just take the pawn right here? This is nothing to worry about. After rook takes b8, knight takes b8, this pawn will just fall in an inglorious fashion. Okay, so back to the game. Bishop d7, connecting his rooks, also adding some protection to that pawn right there. It's a powerful move, just attacking the rook, getting on the dark squares. Takes rook c1. So now with the other rook coming over after the exchange, white chooses not to take this pawn. So instead, excuse me, not to exchange rooks. Instead, he's just gonna capture that pawn. Rook comes to c8, and I would say about this time, black kind of starts running out of things to do. His counterplay is pretty much exhausted. Remember, we said at the beginning of the game that black's counterplay is on the queen side and white is going to press on the king side. Well, we've seen black did a great defensive job in making sure that white didn't get a raging king side attack, and he is actually conducted his counterplay on the queen side. But it's at the point now where, okay, what else is there to do? Like, what can he do now? What's his future prospects? So from here on out, he starts kind of slipping. So now, okay, now what is black to do now? He has the rook on an open file, but so does white. But his bishop is just a killer here, and we'll see what happens. Right? So right now we see after rook a8, we have a little pin going on here, so this bishop can't move right away. It's not a hard problem. Caruana simply doubles up on the file, and now this bishop is free to go. Bishop goes to e8, and this is sad bishop. This bishop never really gains meaningful employment. Meanwhile, this bishop is ready. Look at that. Look at that right there. That is a killer. Let's draw some arrows to show the killer influence. That's why you have to be careful when you give up bishops early in the game. It reminds me of that, like with the Ruy Lopez exchange variation. You give up that bishop early in the game, and it's a presumptuous move, because how do you know that the position won't be conducive to the pair of bishops later on? You're just assuming right at the beginning, oh, I don't need this bishop. And that's kind of like in a Winawer variation. You're giving up that bishop early in the game, and you're trying to make it a position conducive to the knights. And we saw for a long while it was, because of the locked nature of the position. But then what happens? The bishop got out the pawn chain, and now the bishops are having their say in the position. Or in this game, the bishop, speaking of white's dark squared bishop that resides on d6, now has his say. Meanwhile, the other bishop is still bad, reinforcing the reputation of the bad light squared bishop in the French. So after bishop d6, rook takes a2, rook takes a2. And I feel here that white just has a nice advantage. He just has to be patient, and because this bishop is just killer. Notice this rook. This rook cannot go anywhere. This rook is, these squares are controlled. So the rook is stuck. The rook can't even go here. So the rook is stuck on a closed file. We know that rooks need to be on an open file. So we see the superiority of pieces here. We see a dominating bishop, a dominant rook. We see a knight here on c6 that really has doesn't have any prospects. For instance, let's get rid of some of these arrows so we can highlight the knight. Like, where can this knight go? This knight has no prospects, right? Can't go there. Nope. Can't go there. Can't go there. It can go there, but what is it doing? Same question here. Same question here. So the knight's not doing anything, right? The bishop. We already told the story of the bishop. This bishop is purely defending, right? Meanwhile, white has a knight. It's attacking. Dominating rook. Dominating bishop. And the only thing that needs to get into the game is the queen. And even white's king is a little better. So we can say that white has a substantial advantage. The plan here, to sum up real quick, is okay. Black has done a great job in stalling White's kingside efforts, but now his overwhelming advantage on the queen side means that White should shift his attack over there. So the queen in combination with the rook, and this king will just simply waltz over to the queen side and penetrate up this way and across. So let's watch. Queen c1. So again, just getting the queen. He took his worst place piece. Now he's getting into the game. Bishop f7. So Shankland has no moves, so no good moves to play. So now he's just shuffling back and forth. Queen b1 takes over the file. Boom. Because remember, the queen has the properties of a rook and bishop combined. So sometimes the queen will act like a bishop, sometimes it will act like a rook. But besides taking over this square, there's a threat. And we have double attack on that pawn. Just something for black to think about. So Shankland drops his queen back in defensive posture. This is a bad sign. Penetration now occurs. Notice the black queen was defending the penetration, right? Just a move ago. So notice how the master Caruana uses the threats, threatening this to get his queen up there. So watch. Defensive move, right? Because now, and then he just penetrates with the queen. Now the queen has to back off. Boom. So of course, the natural question, is, well, why not just bring the king there, something like that? Well, the problem is move like h5, right? Exploiting the pin. And I don't think this move will be adequate either. First of all, you could just snatch it off and then capture that anyway. So back to the game. There we go. Penetration. Boom. Alright. Now that the queen is off of this diagonal, now Shankland feels, hey, I can move my king there. Double attack. Right now it's protected. Right, but he's just putting pressure, putting maximum amount of pressure on the position, dominating the position. Again, shuffling back and forth, more domination of the position. Bishop c7. Now, what's the purpose of bishop c7? Can you see it? You might say, why is he doing that? Remember, I told you this knight is protected by both the queen on e8 and the rook on c8, right? And it's also attacked by the queen on b7 and rook on a6. Therefore, Caruana simply cuts off the action of one of the defenders, namely this rook on c8. So now this knight is threatened to be captured. So forces Shankland to move to a less desirable location. He attacks. Now the knight is double attacked again, but just from two different pieces. Instead of the rook and bishop, instead of the rook and queen, it's the queen and bishop. He goes back. Of course, black would love a draw at this point by repetition. Caruana simply decides it's time to get one more piece to the game. And this definitely shows the dominance of his position, that he feels that he could just take a stroll with the king. King h7, king h3. These are time control type moves right here. King g3. Not ruining the position, right, in time trouble, but just making the time control. And now it's time for some heavy duty maneuvering. Knight h3 is played, king g8, g5, h5. So the job on the king side is complete. It's closed down, and Caruana shuts down shop over there, and decides that he's going to win the game on the queen side. So here's the knight again. f4, back and forth, back and forth. So how is Caruana going to make progress? And we start seeing Black's position is under a lot of stress, but how to break through, how to break it. And usually you need another move, another piece or a pawn or something like that, a back-breaking move. And we can see the knight coming to the rescue. Notice how Caruana locked up the king side, and now the knight's job is finished over here. So now he's bringing this knight over here to the queen side, right? These are just different areas he can penetrate. See? That extra piece is going to break Black's back. And now we see the king coming. Look at the king just walking. Like there's no war going on. The king owns so much territory that he just feels comfortable. Like, I can just stroll around. See, and this is a backbreaker because you get a king knight on the d6 square. You got this going on. This is rough. See, because now Caruana can move the bishop to this square, making the same threat that he made earlier against the knight on c6. But then with the additional threat coming afterward of the knight jumping in with the fork on d6. So there's problems. See? So Shankland's thinking ahead, and therefore he decides, hey, I can just give up this piece. And I'll show you some of the tactics behind that. Because you might ask yourself, well, hey, wait a minute, he's giving up a piece here. Why didn't he just take the knight? Well, I'll show you the most obvious reason first. Right? So if queen takes, right? And you just have this, right? Even trade-off. We don't want that. Right? Now white is still white is still winning, but we don't want to give the opponent anything in that particular situation. Okay. Here's your other move. Is bishop takes e7, right? But then again, allowing unnecessary counterplay. Rook b8. Again, white is still better, right? After say knight d6, rook takes, knight takes, right? But why turn that brilliant position into something like this? Okay, so when you're winning, try to play accurately. Don't let the opponent get anything. Caruana just attacks the rook. So now this is attacked and the rook is attacked. Because you don't want the game to go on any longer than it has to be. And after knight a7, Shankland resigned. Hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe. Suggestions, comments are welcome. And I'll see you on the next video. I'll pick one of the exciting games from the round, and we'll go in on it. I hope you learned something, and I'll talk to you guys later. Check out my other videos too on my channel. I'm doing 500 Pyrrhic miniatures right now. I'm going to be doing a lot of miniature series. I'm telling you, boys and girls, that's the best way to learn tactics and openings, looking at a bunch of miniature games. And I'm fully annotating them. Uh, the first two pick videos I did, I didn't annotate them. I used the graphics without making comments, and then I decided, you know what? Let me explain these moves. There's a lot of beginning chess players, and sometimes people like to hear another person's voice anyway. So I hope you enjoy my style. Uh, and just check out the other videos. Also, I have Capablanca's 60 greatest endings in audiobook form that I'm in progress of making. Check that out. I'm going over, Earning Turnev's book, and it's a pretty good book. And like we getting ready to go hard on this chess thing, because I'm tired of people being 15, 1600, 1700 for years and years and years. You know, and I'm just handing out some of my methods because you follow my video series, your game is gonna get stronger. You just follow my video series, and game is gonna get stronger. So hope you enjoy it. And said, if you have any questions or anything, let me know. Talk to you later.